Hello from the both of us today. So I am in my 8th month of pregnancy, 34 and a half weeks, and I feel moved to make a video that I wish I'd had access to before and in my pregnancy. I can really count on pretty much one hand the number of books I've encountered specifically having to do with spirituality and pregnancy. There are books on feminine spirituality, there are books on sex magic, there are books on womb magic and womb spirituality, womb awakening, but pregnancy itself and the spiritual aspects is like shockingly and glaringly difficult to find. There's no more embodied spirituality than being in a body and receiving a spirit into your body. It's how each and every one of us come to this planet. And so how mystifying that it's so difficult to find information about spirituality and pregnancy. And so much of the research I've done is simply my own experience. So I want to share some of that with you today. And this is my experience as an intuitive person, as a person who's attuned to non-physical beings. My journey through spirit in pregnancy started before conception even happened. In the summer of 2018, when I went off of my birth control, and we were going to try and conceive, that fall, basically. I was on my table in this very room, and there's an energy healing table right here where you can't see it. And I was lying on my table, as I'm prone to do, and just getting into a meditative space, and I was visited by a spirit who I perceived in my mind's eye is right on my right side, as about a 6-year-old little boy. And I knew in my heart that this was a future child of mine. And so he had a very playful spirit, and I asked him, because he showed up, I thought I might as well ask him, what do you want your name to be? And he said, Oscar. So from that point on, I thought I was having a boy, and his name would be Oscar. And then sure enough, we did get pregnant in November, and we had an ultrasound at 20 weeks, as is typical, and it came back male. We had actually asked them not to tell us the sex of the baby, and the sonographer, bless his heart, made the mistake of not hiding the sex of the baby on the PDF we were given. And he also made the mistake of listing the sex as male. So you know that she's actually a girl. But so anyway, I had that confirmed that this baby was a boy, just like the spirit who visited me. And during the ultrasound, or right afterwards, I remember going to the restroom. And when I was in the restroom, because spirits apparently have a sense of humor like this, it's like, oh, she's on the toilet, let's give her a mystical experience. I was visited right behind me by Oscar again, and I felt his hands on my shoulder on the toilet, and this overwhelming feeling of reassurance came through. And this time he was appearing about 19 or 20 years old, and he had his hands on my shoulders, and he just said, it's going to be okay, Mom. Like, everything's going to be okay. Because the truth is that I'm kind of afraid of hospitals and kind of don't trust Western medicine. And so even getting an ultrasound was kind of iffy for me. And so him being there to offer that total reassurance made complete sense to me. And I was just sitting in this fancy bathroom in Bellevue, Washington, with tears just streaming down my face from this viscerally emotional experience with Oscar. And And so during that whole first trimester, I felt very connected to the spirit of my baby, who I did visualize as a male. And he just felt very present to me. Like the spirit of my child was there almost all the time. And I did some channelings of them and learned some really cool things about things like why souls choose to incarnate. One of the coolest things I learned was that in the spirit world, it's very exciting to come to Earth because this is the only dimension in which separateness exists. Like in this dimension, we're defined by contrast, by opposites, and by difference. And separateness is so exciting because one of the reasons is that then it gives us the opportunity to not know what's happening in the future, to not know each other, and to find it out. In other words, it's like an adventure. It's like choosing to go on an adventure, a really exciting adventure, when you choose to incarnate, apparently. And then because of separateness, we also have the opportunity to love one another in a way that's only possible here. And the physical aspects of love, like sexuality, are only possible here. And so it's very exciting to come to Earth. So in addition to learning the lessons that we're here to learn, it's just plain old exciting and fun to incarnate in a body on this planet. At least that was my child's perspective, which very much goes with their personality. Into the second trimester, a little bit of that accessibility of this spirit who was around me still stuck around, wasn't quite as intense. And I felt a lot of grief coming up for me, like grief about my identity as a singular person dying, right? So really this deep awareness that what I was going through was both my own birth as a mother, my child's birth, but also my death as a separate self, like the death of Catherine as I and everyone else have known her. And so huge amounts of grief were coming through, and also emotions like, and this is something you almost never hear a pregnant woman talking about, like rage at her fetus, like for instigating this death. Lots of it, rage, anger, sadness, and this is so important to acknowledge because so often in our culture, pregnant women and motherhood are covered in what a mother friend of mine calls the saccharine veil, that it's only positive. We only allow the positive emotions and elements of motherhood and pregnancy to be seen. But in reality, it's like the more you focus on embodying just that positive quality of motherhood and pregnancy, the more you repress and thus allow to control your life, the so-called negative aspects. And you become a passive-aggressive, manipulative mother, perhaps, if you refuse to acknowledge the absolute presence, because you are a human being, of course, of the whole shadow side of pregnancy. Because with every birth, there's always a death. And so within every pregnant woman who's growing a new life, she's also growing her own death within her. This is a very beautiful thing. It's something that's so central to feminine energy, is transfiguration, transformation, constant change, constant flux. And one of the central lessons of pregnancy, certainly for me, and I think universally, is the lesson of surrender. So surrendering to these radical changes in your body, surrendering to the change in your identity and the vanishing of yourself as a separate individual as you've known yourself to be. And so a lot of that was swirling around for me particularly in the second trimester. And so at 25 weeks, so here's the surprise reveal of our girl baby. We happened to go in for another ultrasound at 25 weeks just to pay special attention to the heart. And we had the same sonographer as before, and he was delightful and very kind. And we were looking at the image and focusing in on the crotch area, and he was like, "What did I tell you guys last time again?" Because those are labia. So very clearly it was a girl. And so we all had this shock moment that that our whole preconception of so much about who this person was inside of me had shifted immediately. In fact, we'd gotten a huge bin of boys' clothes from a friend of mine. And we'd, of course, like created this individual who's truly largely a fictional individual about who was coming in. And so that forced my husband and I to really deeply examine the preconceived notions that we had about what it would mean to have a son versus what it would mean to have a daughter, and really do some deep thinking, critical thinking about our own perspective. And we discovered a lot of preconceived notions and biases that we wouldn't have known so immediately if this switch hadn't taken place. And so you might be wondering, like, well, is that spirit that visited you fake? Like, does Oscar really exist? And that was my question. Now, one of my mentors, who I was seeing for coaching at the time, told me that absolutely Oscar is a real person. And apparently Oscar's coming next if we choose to have another kid, that Oscar is actually her brother. So that answers that question. Now, before we found out that the baby was a girl, I had actually had a dream simply that I was pregnant with a girl named Gabriella. And at the time I just thought, oh, this is cute. You know, this is symbolism. I'm growing a new feminine aspect of myself. And so when we did find out that she was a girl, I thought, oh my gosh, well, that was a premonition dream, and she already has told me her name. So this is Gabriella. And into the third trimester so far, what I've noticed is that, this was a surprise to me, that the spirit of my child, of her, has been less and less available, has been less and less kind of around as she becomes more human. And I have this message that what she really needs from me is to be very embodied, because she needs to get used to being in a body. And so that's one of the reasons she's not floating around, is that she's more and more present in her body. And what I understand is that the spirit of a fetus, of this human being, goes in and out of their body, so to speak, although in other dimensionalities it's not that dichotomous, right? It's not an either or situation, but we would say they're kind of in and out. Well, she's definitely more in now in the third trimester, and it feels like she's just getting denser and denser as I get denser and denser. And so one of the things that I think is so incredibly vital for women who are pregnant to understand is that pregnancy is probably the greatest initiation of your life. And we live in a culture that doesn't acknowledge initiations. We don't, besides marriage, at least in like a Christian tradition or Christian-ish tradition, we really don't recognize any other initiations. Birth is an initiation of the mind, body, and spirit. And perhaps I will make a video after I give birth and talk about the experience from a spiritual perspective. But I look forward to going into the underworld and letting go of control and allowing my body's wisdom to do the work and to bring me to the limits and to my own limits, and transformed, a completely different person, a mother, on the other side. And of course, there's a lot of terror about that too. And one thing I'm looking most forward to is the experience of absolute feminine power through surrender, which is something that we're not familiar with in Western culture. We only really see masculine power of dominance and taking over and forward movement. To symbolize this feminine power, I've made myself a birth mandala just to have on my altar. So we are planning a home birth with midwives and an amazing doula and a birth photographer to really honor the experience. And so this is 10 centimeters in the middle, this black circle, which is the amount approximately that the cervix opens to let the baby's head through. It's that total power through surrender, through the void, which is why I decided to leave the center totally black, that it's this absolute surrender that constitutes the greatest feminine power. And I feel like it's largely because of how disconnected we are as a culture from the feminine, and this particular version of power, that birth and pregnancy are absolutely not honored to the extent that they deserve to be. So what I want to leave you with is a whole lot of validation that if you're pregnant and you've been looking for information about anything other than Western physiological model of birth, you're not alone, and that you do have to do a lot of your own research. But I hope that this video has been validating for you that birth and pregnancy are absolutely as profound as you know in your bones that they are, and to give it that honor that it deserves by making creative projects around it. There's a book called Birthing from Within that is all about how to be creative in order to process and honor the birthing experience, and take really loving care of yourself and open your senses to everything that's going on out, like within your body and also unseen around you, and do some journaling. Channel your baby. Just write questions in your journal and automatically write the answers. Just see what comes up. Trust yourself. This is a time for you to go inward into yourself, to find the goddess that you are, who's within you and who's within you always and will be for the rest of your life. And this is an initiation into encounter with her. So you are so powerful beyond what you can ever imagine. And if you're pregnant watching this video, I wish you a wonderful pregnancy and lots of empowerment through surrender. And if you're learning about pregnancy through this video, then awesome. More power to you. If you're a man, extra awesome. So thank you all so much. This is going to be my last video before I go through this initiation into being a mother. I'm excited and scared and all the things. So thank you so much for following my work, and have a beautiful day.